For those of us who don't know what a choral society is, could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's like a choral society anywhere in college or anything, people getting together to sing. And our group, which has been, there was always some kind of choral group here, not necessarily the same one that I'm in, although I was in it from practically the time that we arrived, which was 1961. I probably was in it in 1962 or so, and still am. There are several of us who are still around and singing. But we would have concerts often with the Los Alamos Symphony. This town is big enough to produce a symphony, which I think is kind of amazing for a town of this size.
Now, I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about the hospital you mentioned. I have in my notes that you might be able to shed some light on the medicine that they used at the hospital.
Well, I had no experience at the hospital, so other than to tell you what it looked like, it was just an old building, one story building near the lodge, right by not very far from the lodge. And it was an old army building that they brought in, and an awful lot of babies were born in box 1663. That was on their birth certificate, box 1663 in New Mexico, because nobody at that time, of course, people knew about Santa Fe. They did not know about Los Alamos.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you got here, Los Alamos was still government-owned, right?
Oh, yes.
And
yes, for many years.
How did you feel about it being government-owned?
I had no feelings at all. I figured this is kind of a building that this is what we are dealing with. This was during the Cold War when we came. Not the hot war, that was vanished, but the Cold War was still going on, and there was no reason for us to feel anything but go and do your work. We need to have what you're doing. So, and it was amazing in the early days. We would go to parties, dinner parties, and you would find the men on one side of the room after dinner and the women on another, because they didn't talk about work at home. They really did not talk about work. So you didn't say, "How was your day?" They could ask us how ours was, but we never even asked. I never asked, and until my husband died, I had, one of the things I did was to have, on his memorial, have people write things that they had known about him. And I learned some things that had happened at the lab that I had never, ever heard ever before. He just never told me, even after it was all opened and everything.
Imagine that somebody is watching this video, say like 50 years from now, 100 years from now or something. What is one thing that you want them to take away from what life in Los Alamos was like? What's one thing that you want them to know?
Well, Los Alamos was formed especially for the business of fighting the war. And there was a terrible war. I don't think people from 100 years or 50 years from now would realize how dangerous that war was. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. I remember I was in mid school when that happened. We just couldn't believe it. And it was a scary time for people in the country. So the feeling about somebody doing something about the war was very positive. And later, some people felt, well, maybe we shouldn't have done that. Well, what would have happened if there had not been an atomic bomb? The Japanese were not going to quit. And who knows what would have, many lives would have been lost, more even than were lost with the bombs. So I'm sure you will find people on the other side. One time, I guess about a year ago, I was in the historical building, and there were some Japanese women there, and it was very interesting. They were looking at everything. They were looking also at the general area. They were looking at both, and I had all I could do not to ask them what they thought about all of this, because they were in both museums, the historical museum and the scientific museum. And I thought that the mere fact that they were there was interesting, because I'm sure if now, when you think about it, the Japanese are maybe thinking, maybe we shouldn't have done what we did, but we did. And who knows how the children feel. But I do not feel that it was something that we should have been ashamed of. Let us put it that way. So 50 years from now,
Great.
I think that's what I would feel.
All right. Well, I think we're done.
Okay.
Thank you so much.